Okay. Hi, everyone. This is another one of our series where I am having you meet new people in my life. And I just want you to have more information and just know that there's so many people in the world doing really good work. And it's also helping me because I'm finding out who all those people are, but I'm also wanting to share them with you so that you can decide to work with all sorts of different people that are doing everything in the world. So today I have with me Lane Kennedy, and she is a meditation teacher. She's a DNA. I forget what she'll have to tell you more about that, but whatever she told me about it, it was amazing. She also she and the other guest that I have with me, which is Tamar Medford, they both have a podcast together called Laughing Without Liquor because they are on a recovery journey and they can talk to us about that. Also, Tamar, one of the things that she told me about is that she is a neurochange. She's certified in neurochange and she's a neurochange practitioner. And she told me that that translates into a fun-loving Canadian. So Tamar is in Canada, which I love, and Lane is in San Francisco, both places I have not been to yet, but I am totally going to go there. And now I have people that I know there that can help me navigate and get around where I'd like to. So I really want them to tell us about what they do themselves, and then I'll think of questions to ask them. So whoever would like to start, please do.
Cynthia, thanks so much for having us. I just love that warm welcome. And, when we first connected, I knew there's just synergy. Some people you just get, right? Some people, and I love that we just connected. And Tamar and I connected just like that as well. We met during the pandemic online and we became fast, furious friends. And we started this podcast and we've been on this journey because we're both in recovery and we're both interested in supporting people of various ages, various backgrounds, but really helping people to shake free from the stress that we're all living under, and that stress causes us conflict, inner conflict. And when we have inner conflict, we can't decide on what we're going to do with our life, where we're going with our life, how to be a good sister, how to be a good brother, a mother, a parent, right? So really kind of shaking free from that and supporting people so they can live on purpose.
I love that. Intentional was my word last year. And I think it's so important to be intentional in our lives about everything.
Yeah, it's so important. I love that. I'm a meditation and mindfulness teacher. So I really practice being intentional with like the first thing in the morning, what I do and how I move through my day. Yeah.
I love that.
I'm also a mom of a neurodivergent 13-year-old, and I have two Irish wolfhounds. So if I have one here with me and he's very active, very active.
Big too. I remember from when we met before, when you said your dog, so many people have all different kinds of dogs. And then all of a sudden this dog comes in and it's as tall as the table or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh.
A mini horse. Yeah.
Tamar?
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for having us on the show. And thank you for the warm introduction. I love what Lane and I do because for myself, I really struggled when I was a teenager and I turned to alcohol. And that lasted for 22 years because I, didn't like how I felt. I wanted to numb out. And so many people today are trying to live an alcohol-free life, but they struggle. And, they get a little bit of time behind them. And all of a sudden life gets back to normal, but they can't cross over into that long term. They struggle finding their purpose in life, being happy again. And I think what Lane and I are really trying to accomplish is helping people to laugh again. Hence, laughing without liquor. And it's not just liquor; it's everything, right? Food that we all turn to in times of stress. And you can have this amazing life. So I love what you're doing. Really working with teens, helping be a little bit more proactive because this generation is, the one that can change the world. So thank you for having us.
Well, I feel like drugs and alcohol, I'm glad that it's not as just every single person is doing it because being a teenager feels bad. But sometimes being an adult feels bad too. But like they're so confused and there's so many things going on. And I remember using alcohol in high school to just feel like to be more open and outgoing, and to what my friends and I thought at the time was, well, that's how we have fun is, when we're doing that, then that's when we're having fun. And luckily I did not continue. I mean, it was kind of like during that time, and I was very much abusing alcohol. But as an adult, then I didn't continue with that as, abusing it and then becoming addicted. But it definitely caused me to be in some really bad situations. And so I think probably for my audience, the ones that are teens, they might want to know, like, how do I know if this is a problem, or like, is there more things I need to be doing? And as parents, I know when my kids were growing up, my kids are adults now, but when they were teenagers, I really watched that kind of behavior, like what's going on there. And my son went more in that direction for a while and then pulled back, where my daughter really didn't drink, I don't think, until she turned 18. And I always felt like because she waited longer, she didn't get involved in as many things and it didn't become a problem for her. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, first, I just want to make a comment on your daughter waiting to drink, right? And the science is pretty profound that the longer you wait, the chances of you becoming addicted just keep dropping considerably. Okay. And there's also, so if you're a teen and you're listening today, I just want to invite you to wait. Just wait. I mean, drinking is always going to be there, right? It's always going to be a lubricant, a security lubricant, a social lubricant. And I started drinking when I was 12. It was just readily available. And my parents were out of the house. I was raising myself. And, I wanted to be an adult. And it became just a daily habit for me. And I didn't realize that it was kind of sneaking up on me. Unfortunately, I did a lot of drinking and driving. I am so graced with God that I never caused an accident or hurt anybody, because I do know people who, died from drinking and driving. I mean, it's a real thing. My brother's best friend in high school died. And my brother was in a coma for a week because of alcohol use. So substance, again, the young culture, it's normal, you don't want to be alienated, but there's also the sense of, can I learn about myself without it?
Yeah.
Right, Tamar? Can I?
You can. Yeah. And I love that you talk about, the earlier you start, because I actually interviewed a neuroscientist on the recovery summit I had last year. And she said the statistics are, if you start before the age of 21, that 1 in 4 will develop substance abuse issues. If you wait till after 21, 1 in 25. And that's significant.
It's so profound to me to think of that statistic.
Yeah, it is. And, for myself personally, I knew it was a problem when I needed it. It was something I had to justify doing. People would ask me, why do you drink so much? And I would always find myself justifying why I was drinking. Whereas, if you're around people who are very, light drinkers, they never have to justify why they choose to have a glass of wine or not. And I found that was a big sign, was trying to explain to people why I drank.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a 13-year-old, and I'm watching him grow up, and, I was already drinking right at 12, and I'm looking at watching his behavior and what's happening with him. And, he talks a lot about, I want to be a straight edge, and straight edge is it's like a subculture of people who don't drink, who are super clean. They don't smoke. they don't do any drugs. They're, they get into their kind of sports or their activities, and it's like a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets me really excited because it's an option, and people talk about it. It's cool to be a straight edge.
I have not heard of this, but I love it. That's such a great thing.
R-
I was going to
right?
ask you both, because you both have teenagers, like how do you navigate having a teenager and knowing that people experiment with things, and then, how do you talk about it? And I'm sure you're
Mhm.
not freaking out. I mean, you probably maybe insider freaking out if you knew that they were doing this, but like how, because you have all this other knowledge and this experience with recovery, how are you dealing with teens, and what if they were to experiment, or, how would you go about that?
You want me to start it off, Lane?
You go ahead. Yeah, I have my story, so go.
Okay. And I'm looking at this from a co-parenting point of
Mm,
view. So I'm actually, I feel fortunate that I have had, addiction issues, because now being able to talk very openly, and they
mm,
know that
mhm,
I don't drink anymore. But, both of them have experimented, one a little bit more than the other. But for us, it's having open conversations, not flipping out at them or getting mad, and just talking to them, and making them aware of the potential consequences based on, because they were adopted and addiction does run in their family, is making them very aware, and not sugarcoating everything, because I
Mm,
think, unfortunately, and my partners in the education system, they don't want to use certain words, they don't want to scare the kids off, but the reality is, the stuff that's out there right now is getting stronger and stronger, and it's killing
mhm,
teenagers. And
mhm,
so having these open, honest conversations where they can ask questions, and we're doing it in a very calm manner and a very loving way, that they don't
mhm.
feel like they're going to be outcast just because they've tried it, because they are 18, and like Lane said, I mean, I started drinking when I was 14, so they're doing pretty good right now.
Mhm, mhm.
they're ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So last year I had a really big, scary conversation with my son around fentanyl, because
Mm,
fentanyl is this ubiquitous, it's serious, life-threatening drug.
mhm,
And they're getting it into the country that it looks like little Skittles, or it looks like a Tylenol.
mhm,
And kids are swapping pills and swapping candy. And before you know it, the child has it and they die in their bedroom.
mhm,
So I had to have that conversation with him, and it was scary for him. I saw
mhm,
his face change, but it was, again, because he knows that I'm in recovery, and he knows that I'm looking out for his best interest. He just took that information in, and I watched I actually like watch his brain just kind of calculate it. And the next day he said, I have questions. And I said, yeah, what are they? He said, why is this available?
mhm,
How are they getting it into the country? Right. So we had another conversation around this drug, and what are the laws and drug dealers. And,
mhm,
it was a really educational process for both of us. And I was fortunate. Tamar and I had a gentleman on our show called Brock Bevel, and he was undercover vice, and he is really working front lines with this fentanyl epidemic that we have right now, this
mhm,
crisis.
mhm,
And so I had language that I could use to have this conversation around drugs, very
mhm,
specifically around fentanyl. And,
mhm,
what is Narcan, and why do I need that? Because there's been such a big increase in children dying alone in their bedrooms,
mhm.
which is just so frightening to me.
Yes, I think frightening for all parents.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that too. And the part that I think is even sadder is that a lot of the kids that are dying didn't say, I want to take fentanyl,
No,
or I'm going to buy fentanyl. They
no.
maybe were trying something else
Yep.
that then had this fentanyl in it that they had no idea. And I didn't realize, I mean, it is so dangerous that there was a guy that came to a school professional development I went to last week, and he said that he works in a substance abuse clinic for teens.
Mhm.
And so they have to go through their things so that they, because they might be trying to bring stuff in because
Yeah.
they don't want to be without it. And he said, I just grabbed a bag of something. I didn't even know what it was. And just picking up the bag, he passed out and he
Yeah.
was in the hospital for several days. And he didn't even actually touch. I mean, I think there was some residue on the bag.
That's it.
And
That's it.
I thought, oh my gosh, I just can't, so even you could innocently not
Yeah.
even be trying to take something, but like you pick up your friend's belongings or something. So, and
Yeah.
that's the part that I think is even more scary to me
Mhm.
is that you might not even be choosing to do
Right.
something and you could be
Right.
killed by it. So,
Right.
and one of the things that I was thinking about that I've said to parents before is I think that when we're overusing or abusing
Mhm.
or addicted to alcohol, drugs, even I know Tamar mentioned eating, and I've said the obesity epidemic, the opioid epidemic
Yep.
has a lot to do with people don't want to feel their feelings. And so I'm going to take things so that I can feel better. So I think that brings us to some of the other things that you do in your work.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's hard as a teen. It's hard as a human to feel, to manage emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions are just flying all around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I find really important is learning how to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And your listeners are probably like, what?
Mm-hmm.
What? Breathing? And so I do an exercise with my students, just counting their breaths. Just how many breaths are you taking for a full minute? Just let's start there. Find out that information because I think information is really powerful. And once you understand how many breaths you're taking, let's start to train your body and your awareness in getting your breath down to 5 breaths per minute. That's our goal.
Mm.
Because if you're doing anything more than 5, your body is in a state of crisis. You're in that fight or flight. And when you're in that fight or flight, you're changing the chemistry, right? Then you can't think clearly. You're all kinds of other things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And, kids are super active. They're hyper focused,
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening, just think about how many breaths you're taking today. Like, just think about how many breaths you're taking at 1 minute. Just get that information. And then you can start to make some changes so you can feel better and be more confident and more secure. And you may be thinking, oh, Lane, what is she talking about? She's some old lady, blah, blah, blah. But really, I think what Tamar and I are really good at is sharing tools and tricks and tips on how to become just more confident. Wouldn't you say, Tamar?
Absolutely.
And that's
Absolutely.
what teens want, I think. I
Yes.
mean, they maybe don't realize they want more confidence,
Right.
but that is exactly what is going to help them feel better at going to school and hanging out with their friends and not feeling like, oh, do these people like me? Do I fit in? Am I weird? Am I ugly or whatever? If you're confident, you're not thinking about those kinds of things as much. I don't think those things ever go away. I think the same things at my age sometimes, but you don't think about it as much, or you don't let it stop you from going ahead and doing the thing that you want to do, even if you're thinking that.
Right.
Well, and a lot of, I mean, for myself personally, drinking, I felt gave me that confidence, but it was a very false confidence because as soon as I stopped, I had this flood of emotions. And I think I cried more the first year that I, stopped drinking than I had my entire life. And, one of the things Lane and I also teach is about emotional intelligence. And I hear it quite often out there now that, it would be great if we actually taught things like emotional intelligence in school.
Yes.
Because I mean, it's different today with this generation coming up. They're much more aware, they're much more open. But I mean, I grew up with a, suck it up mentality and just tough it out and don't share your emotions or that means you're weak. But what if we actually taught kids about emotional intelligence and said it's okay to cry? It's okay to say I'm upset or I'm angry and really understand what that does to our body. I mean, what a different world it would be today, because people would actually be able to express how they feel and they'd be able to regulate that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I have a, I obviously I don't know the statistics, but I can imagine the arguments in relationships would probably drop
Mm-hmm.
significantly if people
Yes.
knew how to regulate their emotions.
Yeah. Well, the parent-child relationship, teacher to student.
Yeah.
I was an educator for 31 years, so I've been in public schools for a long time, and there would be principals that were not regulated. They were dysregulated, and you're trying to get somebody to regulate when you're dysregulated, like the whole thing. It's not that we're never taught how to process emotions. And
Yeah.
that's what one of the big things that I've been doing on my podcast recently, and even having workshops and working with my own clients about this, is that tunnel. We've got to get through to the end of it, and we've got to feel it even when we don't want to, until we get to this time where it is going to feel better. We just have to allow it without resistance. And so that's what we've been working on. But yeah, school, being in education that long, like we would have like a 5 minute on Friday, let's talk about a feeling or what, but it was never anything. It needs to be daily, and it needs to be, I would like to see when, especially in high school, because that's where I worked most of the time, because so much stuff happens in the passing period. Like there was a lady that came in one time and said, there's a lot of makeups and breakups that go on in the hallway before you get to the next class. And that's a lot of chaos and a lot of drama and emotional upheaval going on. And then they're supposed to come in, the bell rings, and oh, now I'm learning math, or now I'm learning English or whatever. And that is not happening. And then the kids get in trouble because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if they just did something mindful at the beginning of the hour, just a couple of minutes, maybe even just breathing or something, and get everyone, okay, now our brains are now online. We're ready to do the math lesson. It would solve so many problems. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, I'm all for it. I'm all for mindful breathing, mindful moments. I just had a mom last month, so I've been working with her daughter now for a couple weeks on creating new habits as she moves through the school year. She was really struggling with testing. Because again, in the hallways, a lot happens in there. And so when she would go back in the classroom, she just like shut down. And she's a very bright young lady. She's super smart, just amazing. And her mom was really concerned. She, like, I don't know what to do to help her, Lane. What do I do? And so we've been meeting to set her up with mindful pauses throughout the day. But on top of that, we've done some hypnotherapy around calming down her anxiety around testing. So what can she do to test better? So implementing different study patterns at her house and different study patterns at school. And so between the hypnotherapy and the mindful moments, she told her mom last week, she said, Mom, I'm not like, my shoulders aren't up to my ears anymore. I'm actually listening to my teacher. And I thought, that is a win. I don't know if her grades have changed anymore, but we've got movement here.
Yes.
So I think, setting up micro moments is a fabulous, pausing, just at the little locker, just before you open the locker, pause. Look into the locker. I know a lot of girls have their little mirrors in there, looking into your own eyes. Okay. Yeah. And saying, you've got this, and then at lunchtime, before you take your first bite, taking a pause. I've got this. Before you go into the classroom, it's almost like you open the door and you're like letting air in before you. That could be the pause. That could be the mindful moment just to get them through, just to remove any kind of stress from the hallways and all the gossip and all the little, all the little chit chatters, that it's a distraction from that educational experience. Yeah. It's so tough. It's such a challenge.
Well, and I think that parents can take this information too, and we need to have those pauses
Yeah.
as a parent, because I would tell kids when I had, and especially when I was at school and they would talk to me about their having fights with their parents or whatever. And I said, if you need to take a break and say, I need to take a break and go to my room, would you be able to ask for that? And of
Mm,
course, some people said yes, but other ones would say, no, my parent says you stand right here and you listen to me and I'm going to tell you about whatever. And I know I'm thinking, oh, that's never going to work. But I didn't work with the parents, so I couldn't
yeah.
like say, don't do it that way. But parents listen to this podcast too. So how could a parent have a pause in their parenting or help their child have a pause if there's things getting dysregulated at home?
Mar, you want to take it? You want me to take it?
I think you should take this one, and then I can always add to it.
Yeah. Yeah. The pause is so hard as a mom of a teenager. I literally this morning, he didn't put away his bag, which meant we were going to be late.
Mm.
And I I had to walk. I said out loud to my husband, I'm going to blow up. And then I said, oh, I guess I'm not going to blow up. And I took a walk. I walked around the house and I walked downstairs and I came back up the stairs. I had to remove myself from the situation.
Mhm.
And that was my pause. Right. So over the years, I have been extremely explosive. I don't know if I had told you that, Cynthia, on my, the way that I found mindfulness and meditation
I don't
is
think so.
I was extremely angry and
Mhm.
resentful and had a moment of rage as
Mm.
I was driving. And I got out of the car and I was screaming and yelling. And my son was in the car.
Mm.
And in that moment, I thought, what's happening? I kind of had this out of body experience, like looking down at myself, yelling at this man who was twice the size of me.
Mm.
and my kids in the car, and I'm like, what am I doing on the streets of San Francisco? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? And so that kind of kicked off this mindfulness practice that I have, and this search for this inner calm.
Mhm.
And it was absolutely necessary for me to change my behavior, because if I wasn't, either my son was going to get taken away from me, I would be put behind bars, because who knows where I was going with that anger and that inner rage. And it's something that a lot of mothers don't talk about,
Mm-hmm.
right? We just deal with it. We just deal.
Yeah.
I got it. I'm going to tough it out. But the truth of the matter is that was really starting to disrupt not only me, but my whole family.
Yeah.
And so finding a practice has been absolutely integral for my parenting and to become a better mother. Because at the end of the day, I just want to be a good mom.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody does.
All moms just want to be a good mom. We want to give the best to our kids. So pausing and taking a time out is number one for me. I have to do that every day. I start my day 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I meditate for an hour. And then throughout the day, I meditate, I pause. And if I'm not doing that, I'm just not a good mom. And I remove myself like I did this morning. I was like, I'm going to go downstairs for a minute.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what that's
And allowing your child to be able to say they need a minute too. 'Cause
yes.
I told kids that, don't just run off away from a conversation that your parents are having with you, because that's why they get upset.
Yeah.
But I said, if you say in a calm, respectful way, I need a break from this. I can't talk about this right now. And being allowed to be able to do that.
Yeah. And my son gets to see me as a human.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, yeah, like,
That's how you do it.
my mom is struggling right now. Like, he now can identify when I'm having a moment, which it just brings us closer together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's empathy, there's like, so I can't even tell you how grateful I am for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as parents, we're modeling, how do you regulate your emotions? I mean, we've been doing that hopefully we've been doing that from a baby on. How do you regulate? I have a 18-month-old grandson, And I have seen my daughter already, because he gets mad because things aren't going his way, because that's when it all starts, I think. And she does deep breathing. She doesn't really talk to him about deep breathing. She's just like,
Yep.
she's doing it. And then he's looking at it like, oh, okay. Like it's almost like he's like, oh, she's taking deep breaths and I need to do that too. Or she'll do it right in front of him. So he's seeing, oh, I'm taking a deep breath and
He will
and I
start
love
doing
it.
that. I bet you he will start doing that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful to watch
Yeah.
this, because I wish I would have known this when she was 18 months, when she was
Yeah.
doing all this anger stuff.
So great. It's
So
beautiful.
Tamar, I think you've been wanting to talk a couple of different times and I brought that up.
No, it's okay. I was gonna, I am very fortunate that I can co-parent today. Of course, when I was very reactive in my drinking days, I was always just trying to defend myself. And I was always coming at a place of like, you don't know what you're talking about kind of thing. So I was very reactive at one point, and I'm fortunate that over the last 11 years, I've learned how to regulate my emotions. So I've come into this relationship being very calm. I don't anger very easily, although there are things that, the girls will do because they've got their behavioral issues that are because I have to, differentiate what is actually part of their disabilities and what is being a teenager. It can get very infuriating. But I feel for parents, and I have had to make myself aware of what are the right things to do being a supportive co-parent. But I've also been able to chat with my partner about it because, she's been doing this by herself since she adopted those girls. And so the response is a very, yelling and stuff like that. And when we've been able to have these conversations, and I've been able to say, if you yell at your child, they shut down for at least a couple hours.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that, but because I want to be supportive, I started investigating of what I can do, and we have really great conversations. And today she will actually pull them aside and talk to them in a more calm manner. So I think, if you are used to, yelling or trying to get them to do things, it, like Lane said, it's taking that pause and learning how to take those deep breaths. But reading about it, asking people questions. What do you do when your child does this or this? Because we don't know what we don't know, and if we've done these behaviors for a while, it can be difficult to change them, but they can be changed. So really, that self-awareness is super important.
Yeah.
And go with your gut sometimes as a parent. I know when I first became a parent, I was actually a step parent. I started dating my first husband when his son was 2.5 years old. And I became the parent because the mom wasn't in the picture, but I was 18 years old and I'm supposed to be taking care of this 2.5-year-old. And I'm still a teenager. So I'm like being a teenager. And then it's like I was the babysitter or the older sister, it was like, and older sisters are not very good mother material, but that's how I was mothering him because I didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, he had a lot of trauma from being abandoned by his mom as a baby.
Yeah.
And of course, when I'm 18, and even in that was in the 80s, they weren't talking about trauma. So he had a lot of behavior problems.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to deal with them. And so I didn't want to spank him, but became my husband at the time. I don't think he was my husband at the time, but he became my husband. He would say, well, you need to spank him. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel good to me. I don't think that's what needs to happen. And he was like, well, that's why I act so terrible, because you're not spanking him. So he bought me this board that it was like probably this thick, and it was a hand, and it said on it, "Mother's Helper" is written on it. And I thought, oh, I guess I'm supposed to use this. I'm 18. I don't know how to parent people. And so I remember the first time I thought, okay, I'm going to use it because he's acting bad. And he put his hands back on his bottom because he doesn't want, and I was like, you have to move your hands. And of course he wouldn't, because he doesn't want to be spanked.
Yeah.
And I hit him with it just one time, and the side of the board got his little pinky, and he's, 3 or whatever. I don't know. I feel sick to this day. I went to my room. I cried.
Yeah.
I just stayed in my room. He went to his room because he was crying. And I just decided that day, I am never doing that again. I don't know this, maybe I'm not doing this parenting thing right, but that is not what I'm going to be doing. I don't like it. And I never spanked again. And now, as the more I read about it, the more I know about it, I'm like, this is so terrible. Like, I can't even imagine. And yes, I was spanked because that's what everybody thought you were supposed to be doing. I mean, there's probably no one our age that hasn't been spanked, but I'd love it if we could figure out how people don't do that anymore, because it was traumatizing for me just because I couldn't even imagine. And I still think, oh, I don't want my child to do this, so I'm going to hit them. All this stuff just doesn't make any sense to me. So, and I know we weren't going to talk about spanking, but this just made me think about, you know, if I would have followed my heart and my gut about how to parent him, I would have been doing it in a kind, loving way. But I kept listening to people who were already parents telling me, oh, yes, this is the way to do it. And you need to be doing, and now I'm in education with knowing that you can't punish trauma out of people. And so I'm like, oh, that's why it wasn't working, because he had trauma and we weren't dealing with that. We were just getting mad. So,
yeah, one of the greatest things that I did early on in my parenting is I sought help. Because like you just said, I had no idea how to be a mother. And I thank God I was in recovery, because in recovery, we learn to ask for help. We're kind of taught, you don't really know how to live your life. And I was like, oh, I don't. You're right. I don't really know how to live my life. So I asked for help. And I worked with a fellow named Joe Newman, and he wrote a book called Taming Lions. And the population, my son is neurodivergent, and I didn't want to hit him. Like you just said, I don't think it's right. And so Joe would say, you got to get right up in front of him and you got to talk to him like a coach. And I'm like, a coach? I'm like, what? That's not a parent. And he's like, think about this. Do you have a coach? Can you remember a coach that you really loved? And I was like, oh my God, yes, Mrs. Peak. I love Mrs. Peak. He's like, why did you love her so much? And I said, because she would just come right up to me and she'd get in my face and she'd say how great I was, or she would tell me exactly what to do in a really kind way. And he said, well, that's how you need to start parenting. Just like Mrs. Peak. You're your son's coach. And since then, it was a huge shift in how I communicate with my son, but it was a huge shift for me. It took response. It's like it removed this layer of responsibility that I had placed on myself of I'm supposed to do it this way. So now as a coach, it's so much easier. I mean, walking away this morning, oh, I can just walk away.
Yeah.
That's what a coach would do. They could, they would pause. A coach would pause, go into the locker room, reflect, go into their right. Ted Lasso would go into his room, take some notes, and then he would come back out to the to the team. So I think that has been one of the greatest gifts.
I love that. Tamar, what do you think?
I would agree. I had 2 spankings in my entire life, and I never forgot those.
Yeah. Only 2?
Only 2.
You are so lucky.
They were pretty good spankings. And, but my parents communicated with us quite a bit when we were younger, which is really great. And so, today I know how I feel if somebody is angry or yelling. I can only imagine how a child feels.
Yeah.
Right. So, like I said, being aware, gaining that self-awareness. If you don't know, you can't necessarily, because everybody's experience is different. I mean, this is the second time I'm a co-parent, but actually full time. So this is completely different than when I did it in the past. And so I talk to a lot of friends, but I also read books, and I just kind of see what works. So, and that for me has always been the very calm approach, because I don't like getting angry. I mean, as a parent, I can't imagine it feels good to be yelling at your children all the time. It's exhausting. So,
yeah, definitely. Well, I could probably talk to you guys forever, but I always like to keep them somewhat short because I know that especially if teens are or young people are listening, they don't want to
Yeah.
listen forever all day long. So I would like both of you to tell like how people can find you,
Mm.
what you do to help people, and if they, I will put your links in the show notes so that they can get a hold of you if they want to work with you. But tell us where we can find you all over social media or websites or whatever.
Laughing without liquor.
I love it.
Laughing without liquor. And you can always find out more about me, Lane Kennedy at lanekennedy.com. Like I said, I do hypnotherapy, mindfulness, just really here to support people in living their best life.
Mhm.
Tamar?
Yeah, the same thing, laughingwithoutliquor.com. You can find us there. You can send us a message, and we're always happy to connect with anybody who, wants somebody to listen to them.
Yeah,
Mm,
for
I
sure.
love that so much. Well, thank you so much for being with me. This was so fun. It was my first time with two people. And so whenever it's a new experience, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, but it was exactly how I would want it to be.
You did so great. Thanks, Cynthia.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Sure, you're welcome.